Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the Bangalore Literature Festival 2020. My name is Mohan Ram. I'm an actor anchor and I will be your host for today. It's really exciting to welcome all of you to day 2. Yesterday was day 1 and we had a great lineup. We very similarly, we had a hybrid event and this is the first time we're doing this, of course, due to unavoidable circumstances, as we all know. So we've been able to accommodate people at the Bangalore International Center where we're all, some of us have gathered. And many of us, we have many others joining us on Zoom. So thank you for tuning in and joining us in person or on Zoom. Really appreciate it. For those of you who gathered here, please ensure that you're masked at all time and you're taking necessary safety precautions. With that, we're ready to get started with our first session on day 2 of the Bangalore Literature Festival. Our first session is a conversation with Chetan Bhagat on his recently published work, One Arranged Murder. Chetan Bhagat, of course, needs no introduction. He's the author of 12 blockbuster books. These include 9 novels and 3 non-fiction titles. Chetan's books have remained bestsellers since their release. 5 out of his 8 novels have already been adapted into successful Bollywood films, and others are in the process of being adapted as well. The New York Times calls him the biggest selling English language novelist in Indian history. Time magazine named him amongst the 100 most influential people in the world, and Fast Company listed him as one of the world's 100 most creative people in business. He will be in conversation with Shrabanti Bakchi, who is National Features Editor at Mint, where she writes on books, arts and culture, and the intersection of technology and society. Before I hand it over to Shrabanti, quick announcement. If you have questions, please feel free to drop them on our Q&A section on Zoom. Or if folks gathered here have questions, please feel free to come here and you can use this mic to pose your question to our speakers at the end of the session. All right, with that, over to you, Shrabanti.
Hi, Chetan.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Hi, Shrabanti.
Hi, Chetan. Early morning for you?
No, I'm in Delhi now with enjoying the, I mean, it's not that cold, but I just wanted to wear a jacket.
You're in Singapore, right?
No, I just came to Delhi. I eventually made it and I just thought I will, come back home. Yeah.
That explains the jacket then.
Yes.
Thanks for being here this morning with us, Chetan. As you know, the Mangalore Literature Festival has always, have welcomed you. We've so many memories of your sessions over here. Thanks for being part of this very strange and still like a very warm festival that we are doing here, which is both online and offline. Thanks for joining in today. As everybody knows, we are going to be mainly talking about Chetan's latest book, One Arranged Murder, which is a slight departure from what he's written earlier, although he has written a murder mystery earlier as well. But this is like not just a novel about like society and family and romance and young people, which is Chetan's forte, as we all know, but it's also a very accomplished and complex murder mystery which has twists and turns. It has the bodies piling up and like quite a startling denouement at the end where you are left guessing the identity of the murderer. So let's start by talking a little bit about the novel, Chetan, and what made you take to this life of crime.
Okay. Firstly, thank you for having me yet again at the Bangalore Lit Fest. First time doing it from far away. It's very special Lit Fest for me, especially because Shiny, my editor, is one of the organizers, and I've literally seen this festival being born and become so big. And of course, this is a little virtual, semi-virtual kind of setup, but hats off, they're pulling it off even in 2020. One of the few Lit Fests to happen in 2020, especially with a somewhat physical element to it also. And Shravanti, it's always nice talking to you again. Just in terms of full disclosure, Shravanti has done too many interviews of mine. She's probably sick of me in her head, but she's a very good actor as well. So she's going to pretend to be interested. And I'm
Yeah.
a
I think this is the third time we are talking in about 6 months.
yeah, I feel like the only person. I feel like you're my therapist or something.
No, I was just telling my husband that I probably talk more often to Chetan than to you.
Okay, I'm not sure if that was a good idea, but even in the lockdown, you're not talking to your spouse. I mean, yeah, actually, that is a whole separate discussion. 8 months to be locked up with your spouse. I don't know if marriages were designed for that,
Yeah,
but
exactly, right.
yeah. Okay, but this is the book we are talking about today. Thank you so much, Shravanti, for such a nice introduction. It's been I've been, writing for now, like this is my ninth novel, and I've been writing since 2004. And I was very clear that I wanted to have a career as a writer. I wanted to, uh, of course, 5.7, my first book itself became quite popular, but there was this fear that you'll become that one book writer where, like, you and a lot of writers all over the world are like that, where they are famous for that one book, which is, there's nothing wrong in that. But then what do you do with the rest of your life? And I like writing and I like telling stories. So I thought I want to have a career. So I try to do different things from time to time so that to, you can say, reinvent myself or lengthen my career or surprise people, so that there is, um, when you're writing the ninth book, there is a certain writing style that will be there. But you must change a few things. So the biggest departure I made was the last book, Girl in 105, where I moved from love stories, which is like a good 12 years of my life I wrote love stories, to murder mysteries. And I think it is a big risk in a way, because it's a whole different way of writing. But this and that got a good response, and then I thought I'll take something more challenging, and that's when I took on One Arranged Murder, which is a family murder mystery. You can call it like a murder in a Punjabi family, and I thought I can do more with it. I'm glad people liked it. I'm glad you liked it also. You wrote a semi review come interview in the Mint, and that's means a lot, because when Bengali people like your books, they're generally good.
Not just Bengali people, but Bengali people who read a lot of crime like all their lives.
Yes, yeah, yes. That also. You're like the, so you're the big crime person, and when, the thing with crime books is, a reader is not just reading the book; they are solving the crime. So you have to kind of, it's, and if someone has read a lot of, every trope has been tried, every trip, so it's kind of hard to keep it going in 2020, when literally thousands of good crime books have been written. So yeah, there has to be something fresh in it, even though it's a crime book.
Absolutely. So, what was the process of doing that? Because, also as people who read this book without giving away any spoilers, but, timings are important. The murder takes place at a certain time, and, it has to be worked backwards. Alibis have to be set. Not being somebody who's written a lot of crime, this is just your second crime novel. How did you manage to get those things right, and how challenging was it to sort of make it so sort of precise that you don't give anything away?
Yeah, it's it's like I had to read a lot of crime books, to be honest. Nobody like is so great that they can just start doing something and it. Like I said, it's a very different ball game to write a good mystery book. Most people can guess otherwise, and the trick about a murder mystery is, when the final revelation come, who's the killer, people should be like, oh my god, I could have done this if I had paid more attention. That's the best reaction. It should not be eye rolling, oh my, yeah, author just made up a killer, there is no way we could have known. That should not happen. Or while reading in the first 5 chapters, you're like, yeah, I know who the killer is, I know what happened, now I have to finish this book to find out. So just the right amount of tension has to be kept, and I think that is a skill. We often, um, Indian fiction has been associated with certain kind of literary fiction, so we haven't really paid attention to murder mysteries. We see them as very popular kind of fiction, but there is a lot of, um, if not art, there is a lot of craft in it, and
Yeah.
that has been there over the centuries. Really, I literally started reading the first there are books which like are so old, stories about, like, who did it. There's a very famous story where an orangutan did the crime, you know like and it was a murder mystery set in Paris, and they found some orange hair. It was quite a and that same day an orangutan had escaped, and so of course it feels a little um, implausible now, but in that era, in the 18th century, 19th century, it was quite. From there, it's come to like even a Agatha Christie, Hitchcock, Conan Doyle. So I took all that and I tried to figure out what are the techniques they are using. And then, of course, it is a Chetan Bhagat book. So there's a lot of readers who are already going to pick up the book. So they don't want me to be a completely different person. They want their comedy, they want their relatable characters, they want the Indian middle class in it, they want some social issues backdrop of what they see around them. I think that's what makes the book fresh. And that's what the context that I create is something other mystery writers in the world can't. And I think, so yeah, it's a lot of care. In terms of precision, I that is something I think doing my engineering and doing my banking experience really helped, because I am very comfortable with spreadsheets. And I know writers feel, oh my God, he uses spreadsheets to write books. But I do, because uh, not for anything else, but like you said, the murder and the timing, and it's a Karwa Chauth murder book. Just that's the opening, right? The girl is killed at the terrace on Karwa Chauth, so the time of the moonrise is important, and how it all happens. So you can't just write these books like, oh, let me just write along, and we'll figure it out in the end. Like
Better this
these
all.
books, that's just the people saying that about crime novels are lying, because crime novels have to be mapped out, planned out very, very precisely for them to be good. You can maybe get away with like doing a memoir or like a murder a love story, like where in the end you decide how it all ends. But in a murder mystery, you have to be super precise. Otherwise, literally, my readers are going to pick out and say, no, this can't have happened, this couldn't have happened, and this couldn't have happened. So yeah, so I think that having familiarity with that precision, that nerd like precision, helps me write these books where I can do such precise endings. I'm not revealing much, but do read it. You'll know what I'm talking about.
Right. So lots of spreadsheets. Yeah, got that. So coming to that Karwa Chauth part, I mean, obviously, the murder starts on, I mean, the murder happens on the night of the Karwa Chauth as somebody is waiting for the moonrise and everything, right? So tell us a little bit about that. Like, what was the origin of that Karwa Chauth thought, and why did you decide to set it on that particular festival day?
Yeah, so like they say, authors look for inspiration,
Chetan,
and hello,
yeah, your audio was breaking up a little bit. I think it's
now it's
fine.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm saying, they say authors get inspiration from anything. I was looking for something very Indian to set the story in, so that because mostly the murder mysteries have people have read are from Western authors, UK authors, American authors, and while they are very, very good, they don't give us that same flavor. Like a Agatha Christie will never write a Karwa Chauth story, right? So, but
She's
the
written
whole
similar murders, but not Karwa Chauth, unfortunately.
yeah, and the whole concept of Karwa Chauth is it's so different, and it's so. And one day I was flipping the newspaper and I saw that in Gurgaon, one lady was celebrating Karwa Chauth. She went to the roof and she was pushed from there and she was murdered. It is a real incident, and I was like, wow, now that's something I've never heard. And how could it have happened? So there is also a genre in crime called locked room mysteries, which is not only where you try to find out who did the crime, but how did the crime even happen? Like it's almost like a crime is impossible. If you are sleeping in your bedroom and you lock the door from inside, uh, how did the crime even happen? Right? That becomes an equal mystery on who did the crime.
Right.
Those become the most intriguing murder plots. I mean, I'm just talking from a storyteller point of view. I'm not taking away the tragedy of these incidents. So please understand, we are discussing storytelling. It's a lit fest. But even say something like an Arushi murder, right? It just gripped the nation because of course, the murder of a young innocent girl. Who would do that? And secondly, they said she was in her house and her bedroom was locked by the parents at night, so she was safe. So how did it even happen? And that led to all kinds of confusions and the nation. Similarly, the actor Sushant's mystery, it just, how did it even happen? How can it happen like this? Without a note, how is it? So that tells you that when we don't even know what the crime is, how did the crime even happen, it becomes more intriguing. And they became very popular in the 1900s, early 1900s, I mean, and that like there were crimes. There is one story I read where literally someone dies in their bedroom, they locked the room from inside, um, but there was a tiny ventilator on top and someone sent a snake inside.
That's a Sherlock Holmes story. Yeah.
Yeah, with a thread or something. So like
Exactly.
those kind of things. Of course, I didn't do something like that, but if a girl is in her own house, she went to the roof and she was just about to meet her fiance there, and she dies, who did it? It has to be someone from the family. And why did they do it, and how is it even possible? And I think that just make, I felt, would be an amazing start for a story. And always, it's, you have to hook the reader from the beginning. So yeah, Karwa Chauth gave me that moment.
Yeah. You almost called it the Karwa Chauth murder, right? And also the
Yes.
whole naming convention.
Yeah. So firstly, the name, I mean, because Karwa Chauth murder seemed like a very nice, interesting name. I also have numbers in all my books, as many people know, like from a 2 states to a 5 point someone to, you know, the Revolution 2020 or something like that. And Karwa Chauth fitted in because Karwa Chauth actually means Chauth. Chauth is the fourth day of the moon. The
Right.
only reason we didn't go with that title was because that's not a universal Indian festival. In the South, they don't celebrate it. I know it because my wife is South Indian and she doesn't keep Karwa Chauth. So, and now
Maybe
after
that's
the
why you're
story,
so
she's,
obsessed with it.
yeah, sorry.
Maybe that's why you're so obsessed with Karwa Chauth. I remember there was some earlier there was some comment about you had made about an ad about Karwa Chauth, which also became a big controversy.
Well, I mean, yes, long time back, I was a brand ambassador of Shadi.com. Don't ask me
Right.
why, but uh, but that was, that, I don't know, somehow I've been fascinated by this festival. It is so interesting, this whole thing of not eating for your husband, and I've seen polarized opinion on it. Some girls love to keep it. I'm talking of girls. I'm not talking of a man's point of view on it. And some girls say it's totally regressive. So I felt it's anyway a controversial festival to begin with, and then to do a murder mystery here would be great. But my wife doesn't keep it, and after I've written this book, she's like, I'm definitely not keeping it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. So coming to this, the locked room aspect of the murder in this story, like you said, she's surrounded by her family. And in Indian books, in popular culture, we are very used to seeing the family as this unit of support and love and everything, right? But then in your book, like dark secrets come out in the family as well. Do you think that the Indian family is always a place of love and support and laddus and hum saath saath hain and stuff like that, or there is a lot of darkness there for authors like you to exploit, or like
Yeah. Yeah, so a good mystery, I feel, is where you set out to reveal who is the killer, but you actually discover a lot of other things in the process, which you were not supposed to find out, because people always have stuff to hide, and maybe that's why they are being cagey about things. They may not be the killer, but they have secrets to hide, and I think it makes the story more interesting. And I think Indian families in particular are amazing at projecting a certain image and defending that image. And log kya kahenge is the most
right,
common Indian thing, which translates to what will people say. And those will come out if there is a murder in the family and it's a setting where very high chance that someone in the family only did it. uh, Things are going to come out, and the facades people put out. Indian families, it's like how now today millennials put amazing Instagram posts to show that they are so happy and so beautiful and having such a good time in life. If you see Instagram, you'll feel like everybody's happier than you. But that's not actually true. Every picture we put on Instagram, we at least take 10 photos and take the best one. So even for every random post, we don't put the imperfection there, and we only put the highlight reel, right? If I'm having a good ice cream, I'll put a picture of that. But if I had a horrible food, I will not put it. Or if I didn't get food that day, I won't put it. So this thing has been there in Indian families for a very long time, and I thought that that needs to come out. The startup culture, the person who dies has an internet startup. Bangalore is obviously quite the hub for that, and the fact that it's not all clean, you know. Yes, there are amazing success stories coming out of startups. They are really the stars of India today, but there is a lot of fraud and a lot of if not fraud, unethical stuff going on at startups, people trying to pump up valuations, trying to siphon funds, stuff like that. So I thought that would be a very interesting thing to also talk about. These are just things that happen in India, and it could, you know, they are just the backdrop, and I think it adds a layer to a story,
Yeah.
which I often found some of the mystery writers abroad didn't really bother about.
No,
Some
yeah,
did, but
yeah.
like they were mainly interested in a gripping puzzle. I didn't want to write a puzzle. It is a novel where even if you have no interest in murder mysteries, you learn something about the Indian family or the Indian startup culture. Even if someone told you who the killer was, you'll still enjoy the novel because there's a lot more in it.
Right. And actually, like, a lot of stuff that you write about in your novels seems to have a resonance or an echo in stuff that's happening in India at that moment. Like when this book came out, the whole Sushant Singh suicide case, I mean, was like very much in the news. And in fact, I think people also asked you if you had written this book because of that, or
That was so bizarre because I wrote this book last year and we were going to release it in April, May this year. I had announced, sort of announced it also that new book is coming. And because of coronavirus lockdowns, we had to wait. And then we finally released it in October. And then end of September. And during the publicity period, which is basically we announced it in August, Sushant's case was like ruling the news channels, and his unfortunate death happened on the 14th of June, and obviously my book would have come out well before that. But when we finally announced the book in August, September, I thought that that case would have gone, but it was still in the airwaves, and everybody wanted to, like, I anyway give interviews about my new book, but I would give interviews, and because of the name One Arranged Murder, every channel would connect it to somehow Sushant's thing. And they would take my interview about the book, and then they would ask me a question about Sushant, and they would only show the Sushant's question, or they would only put my book cover and Sushant's picture. And you can always pose it as a question: is this book about Sushant's mystery? Well, the answer is no. But hey, you don't have to put the answer on the screen, right? So that led to a lot of confusion. Some people even said I'm using his death, I'm quickly writing a book. I don't work like that. It is just not possible. And I've never said it is on him. But I think it does validate the point that given the right mystery, India can get gripped. And I think that, unfortunate though his death was, it tells me that I made the right switch. Currently, we are not in an era where people are interested in um, sweet romantic stories so much. They were 10 years back, but today we have so much content. We have lessening attention spans. We have literally 10 options from YouTube, Insta, all this just platforms, and in each platform there is literally millions of pieces of content. So to get people to read a book, it better be really gripping. It better have a element beyond just will the boy get the girl or not, um, and that is, did the boy kill the girl or not, kind of thing, which makes it more gripping. So I think the obsession of this country with the Sushant case only shows that I made the right switch at the right time. But of course, I didn't have any relation to do. This was not because of what happened.
Yeah. But this obsession was also manufactured to a certain extent by the media or like certain sections of the media, right? And by keeping it on night after night, the speculations, pointing fingers at people who were probably not really to blame. And in fact, this is also something that you bring up in the book, like the whole sensationalism in the media
Yeah.
around slightly, I mean, unexplained death or a violent death. How did that, like that also, your comments seem to sort of reflect on the whole TV drama we saw around Sushant's death. So
Yeah.
how did that come about?
You use the word drama, right? Drama is more interesting to watch than information, right? Drama is difficult. Drama is what people get engaged by. Each news platform, each social media platform is basically competing for your attention, right? What is Facebook doing? It wants your attention. Instagram wants your attention. TV channels want your attention. TV channels can easily be switched also. If it's not interesting to you, you'll quickly switch it. It's the easiest thing in the world to just flick a channel. So news, pure news will be less interesting than drama. So to keep people's attention, news channels have often crossed the line and say, let's find drama in it. And that is dangerous for the country, I feel, because there are today thousands of sources of drama for people, right? You can literally go anywhere. I'm not saying this, I earn money through drama. So I'm very much for drama, for telling stories in whichever way. But when I see the news, I want to see the news. When every place has its purpose. Like for example, if you and I start fighting right now, if I start abusing you or you start abusing me, give me 3 Bengali abuses, I give you 3 Punjabi excuses, this video will go viral.
Yeah.
We can do it, right? And we can get so many views. And but should we? And that's the question people need to ask. And I think we also need to um, as citizens of this country realize that get all the entertainment you want. We grew up with Doordarshan, we never had any entertainment. Now you have it. So why are you looking for entertainment in the news? Why are you saying that news may be manoranjan, news may be drama chahiye? And I think that's what's happening. To create drama, there is fake fights, fake news, and that's a different level of unethical behavior. But a next level has been crossed where to make really compelling drama, someone must get hurt in real life. Someone innocent must get hurt in real life. Someone must get arrested. Someone must get shamed. Someone must get humiliated. Someone must get uh, pronounced guilty without a trial. Because then it's more fun. Oh my God, look at them. Look at this actress. I saw her Insta posts videos from Maldives in a bikini the other day. She was like living the life and now she's in jail. Oh, wow. I can't stop watching this. Meanwhile, Corona is going crazy and China is on the border troubling us and the economy is down. And, what are we going to do about all these things? That's not dramatic. And I think that's what happened. And I think later on, it was revealed that it was basically just drama, empty drama, because there was no basis on all this. Of course, the investigation report is not final yet, but it's largely pointing to that there was nothing nefarious or nothing really one big controversial plot that was going on, and you know, and the theories that were promoted were absolutely ridiculous. So I think we as a nation have to decide what we want. And the media also has to decide. I know it's desperate times for media. Advertising is low, keeping the viewer is difficult. But I think it is more a reflection of who we are as people and how we have started demanding drama from news, even if it is fake, even if it means innocent victims. And I think that's a little troubling.
Yeah, and especially when the person against whom that anger is directed, there are certain inbuilt biases, like you have said, right? I mean, against them, be it certain sections
Yeah.
of society, communities, or
Yeah.
be strong, independent women.
It's easier to create the allegations, or it's easier to kind of uh, throw a theory out there that people are going to buy if it plays into some stereotypes. Even forget this case. If people have a bias against Muslims, you blame Muslims for something, spreading corona, for instance. That kept going for a while, and then
Yeah,
you realize that's not true. I mean, there's 200,000 cases in the USA happening every day. Perfectly, Christian white people are spreading corona there to each other. I mean, that is just ridiculous. It's a virus. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. So, but that kept going. I mean, that kept, and the court, like literally the high court of the country, like scolded the channels for doing this. But how dangerous is such kind of thing? Why? Because there is a bias, you know, and you can, and if there is a independent, free thinking Bengali woman, Shravanti, what happens there? That whole theory, I don't know. First, I have to ask you this question. What is this Kala Jadoo? And what is this black magic Bengali woman? Where has this come from? Is it some mythology, some theory, some novel, a story? What is this?
no, it's actually, it comes from this whole fear, like you said. I mean, especially in some of the states around Bengal, because Bengali women were maybe like to some extent, see, there are a lot of biases and a lot of prejudices in Bengali society also. It's not like some uber sophisticated, whatever it's made out to be, like some cultural head. But there was a certain amount of more education of women, and women did get a bit of a start. There were people were working, so I think that fear, it's like the fear of the divorced woman, like
Yeah, but what's the black magic in Bengal? Is there is there like some stories around it, or
yes,
I
there are lots of these ghosts, and there are in Bengali literature, like there are lots of different categories of ghosts. So, like an unmarried woman's ghost will be of a certain type. A married woman's ghost will be of a certain type. They have their particular characteristics and everything. So, I think it comes from somewhere from that. And then you have all these Bengali babas. Now they put up the tent
oh
and
yeah.
they distribute some booty and stuff. There is some strict
Yeah, so
association.
it's almost funny, except they were innocent people harmed, right? You run a news, fake news, that Chetan Bhagat saw aliens in the garden yesterday. It's fake, it's unethical to play it, but maybe you can have some viewership on that, and I can also come on TV, say, "Yeah, definitely I saw aliens, this, that." Okay, it doesn't harm anybody. But if it's like hashtag arrest so and so now, or this is guilty, did she do black magic, I mean, and you played and you played and you give it legitimacy, and you get three experts who chime in on the how it all happens. I mean, it's not funny anymore. It's very dangerous. And I think India may have realized it. They may not. I mean, it takes a lot for people to admit that we were played and we were fooled and we shouldn't have. But if you're seeing this, please realize that we all have biases in our head. We all do, right? And it's very easy to convince you of something when you have a pre-existing bias. And I think independent women and women with opinions, just women with opinions, and who are living life on their, or at least trying to live life on their own terms, you know and choosing a different path. uh, I honestly didn't know, Shravanti, that there is so much resentment against them, because they have millions of Insta followers. And I thought, like, oh my God, sometimes like, for me to grow my Insta following, we have to put content, we have to put motivational videos, I have to put so many things. And they would just put one picture of a holiday by the pool and they'll get so many likes and so many followers. I was like, people like them, man. But those likes are not likes.
No, that's
Like,
only if only if you project a certain image. Like they only want if you validate that image in their head, then you are liked. But the minute you step out of that mold, then you're not liked anymore.
Yeah, so that's almost like a whole new discussion, a whole new session. But yeah, this has taught us a lot, and I hope this doesn't happen again. I hope something else ridiculous will happen, that I can assure you of, but at least something like this won't happen. At the end of the day, it was a private case of death, a private citizen, and it was even if there was a crime. Firstly, no evidence till now, and we will wait for the final thing. But no evidence seems to be coming. But even if it was a private crime.
Exactly.
So there's a limit to how much you can obsess about it.
Absolutely. I'm just going to ask how much time do we have left so that, okay. Okay, my a last question, and then we move to questions, audience questions. Last thing, Chetan. I mean, you write about romance, and we were talking about current events also right now. So, there's this whole the love jihad controversy, which is not just a term anymore. Right now, it's in part of our
Yeah.
laws in certain states. I mean, being a romance writer and being also like obviously a sensible person, how do you react to that? Like, what do you think we need such laws?
Yeah, and in fact, my previous one, the same detectives in One Arranged Murder, Keshav and Saurabh, in the previous book, Girl in 105, he is in love with a Muslim girl called Zara, and this whole issue comes up. It's the opposite, I guess. Firstly, the term love jihad is a terrible term, because it has these jihad, although jihad origin is not bad, but it is closely associated with terrorism now. And to say love jihad is a very weird kind of way to put things. And so therefore the term itself needs to change. I think even if you want to talk about it, you could talk about conversions, right? And then the context of conversions, and maybe something like that. The Tanish cat, for instance, was a completely avoidable and ridiculous controversy, where all they showed was a loving Muslim family being nice to a Hindu daughter-in-law. I mean, where was the jihad there? I mean, there's no jihad there. So, and it really, this is exactly the kind of thing that damages economic sentiment, investor sentiment in India. And this is where the far right or hard right goes out of control. And I think it needs to be checked. There is one, but at the same time, Shravanti, it's important to understand where this is coming from. What is happening is a lot of liberals are like, oh, these are just abhorrent, deplorable people who talk like this. And they're just, if you do that, that's not understanding the issue properly. Why is it being floated around by politicians? Why is it people are getting away with it? Why is it finding resonance? You know, and if you don't understand that, and if you just say, I am just so better and superior to all these people, and I'm just going to tweet about how horrible it is, and 5 of my ultra liberal friends are going to like that, and I'm going to like their post, you're not achieving anything. So it's important to bring out what is happening. I think what people feel is that when you marry a Muslim spouse, the insistence on conversion is much higher. That the Muslim family has very strict, I mean, hell breaks loose in every household, I think, if a Hindu Muslim want to marry. It's not like the Hindu household, there won't be resistance. There will be resistance everywhere. But it is believed that the Muslim household will insist more in general about converting. And maybe intermarriage is okay. So, but the conversion maybe is something the girl or the boy, even the boy, doesn't want to do, because people want to fall in love with another religion, but that doesn't mean they want to change their religion. So I think that addressing that, having that discussion on how do we know that this, even though there is love between the couple, the conversion is not being done out of duress. That is a tricky one. And I agree, the answer is not to call it all love jihad and just go, but is the girl, because the pressure from in-laws can be real. That okay, fine, but at least you have to turn Muslim, and that is distressing. Why in a country like India, where we have different religions, I don't know if conversions is a great recipe to keep harmony. I think a lot of people in the Hindu religion believe that Hinduism doesn't insist on conversion as much as the other religions do. Christian, we've had issues with Christian missionaries. So at the root of it is the problem of that what people feel that Hindus are not insisting on conversion as much, whereas in certain other religions, conversion is encouraged. Like either there are very strict rules that you have to be a Muslim to get married, or in Christians, it's like you have to serve God, you have to convert more people. And I think that needs to be discussed properly in a place like India as to how do we operate? Like on one hand, we say we are secular, we are pluralistic, but if four religions are or three religions want to convert people, whereas some religions do not want to convert anybody, that discussion needs to happen. But all I'm seeing is an ultra left debate and an ultra right debate, which is just noise. And it's not going to lead to anywhere. The ultra right is going to say, see, this is what they don't understand us. They're not getting us. We are for you. And they're going to find their supporters. And ultra left is going to say, see these horrible Indian people. It's all Modi and Amit Shah's fault. It's all this, that. They're not going to get anywhere. So the root problem is somewhere here. It's a tough issue. It's not an easy one to discuss. But then you want to solve it? Do you discuss it?
Got it.
Abhijit Kabad, and he asks, you have shifted your writing from romance to crime thrillers, and he'd love to know what are the changes that you implemented to change your writing style.
Yeah, so like I said, it's a totally different approach when you do a crime thriller. There are some rules or guidelines, even if they're not strict rules, and that is, of course, right from when the crime happens. Usually the crime is like a murder or something very gruesome, until the time the reveal happens on who did it and how it all happened. That's the climax. And in between, there is a whole, the book has to flow a certain way so that these two scenes become very plausible, very interesting, and it all kind of adds up. And that requires a lot more structuring, a lot more planning. And I think after having done so many books, which were very fast paced, people said even my love stories were fast paced and you kept turning the pages. I felt I'm ready to do it, but I must say it was a big challenge, and it takes a lot more editing, a lot more rewriting, frankly, to keep the person interested in and to make the suspense satisfying in the end. Because the worst thing you can do is to build a lot of suspense. Forget a book. In real life also, if someone says tomorrow is your birthday, I have a big surprise for you, I have a big surprise for you, big surprise for you, and then in the end you give them a pair of socks, it's better you don't say that there's a surprise. But same with the murder mystery. If I'm saying, oh my god, one arranged murder, it's like the biggest, like I'm really like setting it up, right? I'm telling you, you're going to read about something very interesting, and if in the end it's like, yeah, fine, that's not good. So I think you have to write knowing that you've made a big promise to the reader and you better deliver on it.
Makes sense. Yeah. The next question is from Sachin Bishnoi. He says, sir, do you think we should discuss politics at home? He says he has spoiled relationships with you because of that. The murder happened in this book because Anjali came back to India and she returned because she had a fight with her father, Greg, over Trump. So your thoughts, Jim?
It's a very interesting question. Should we discuss politics at all with our relatives or friends? And especially on those WhatsApp groups. Oh my God. Because WhatsApp groups are the worst to discuss politics, because you will lose the tone, you will lose the context. You will just say like, try discussing farmer bills on your family WhatsApp group. Won't have a family at the end of it. So I'm okay with it. But see, I have reached a point in my life where I can listen to the right, I can listen to the left. I kind of see that both kind of make sense, and sometimes one is more right and more correct, and the other time others are more, the left is more correct, the right is more correct. That's okay. Like, look at a farmer bill. We are not going to discuss the farmer bill, but no political party would ever go willingly want to do something against farmers, right? And the BJP, for all whatever it is, people may think of it, they know how to win elections. Fair, factual statement. And they will not do something which, at least in their intention, is something that is harming farmers. I mean, you can say about other communities and all. So they have drafted it. There must be something good in it. You must do this because a lot of the farmers are not happy with it. I'm okay with saying that both sides have right or wrong at the same time. But for most people, they find it very difficult. They get emotional when it comes to politics, and they get, when you get emotional, you get personal, and when you get personal, you get hurt. So I think you have to know who you are talking to. My wife and I have very different views on issues sometimes, and she gets and that's great about her. She gets very passionate about what she thinks, and even politically. I don't. I know a lot of politicians. I know they haven't you noticed, they all wish each other on their birthday. They all hang out together. They are not fighting like their supporters are fighting on Twitter. Have you ever seen those doing tutu meme with each other? Very rare. Maybe in the campaign somewhere, but usually they're wishing each other birthdays. They are like, if someone is unwell, they're wishing each other, please get well soon. I don't see people from the wire telling people from Op India to get well soon when they're sick, or people from Op India wishing the wire people happy birthday. That's never going to happen, right? But then who's the real, like, why? Because if you see, a Congress party person will wish the Prime Minister happy birthday, the Prime Minister is going to wish Sonia Gandhi happy birthday. So if you can do that, you should
Prime Minister Modi.
Sorry?
Rahul Gandhi hugs Prime Minister Modi.
Yeah, they're hugging, and at a less senior level, they are meeting each other for dinners. Who will politicians hang out with? They'll hang out with each other only, no? They understand each other. So I don't understand why families and why people and why friends and why people on Twitter get so angry and get so personal about it, because the people they're defending, they themselves are not behaving that way. So if you think that you can't, the other person is going to get personal and emotional, then I think don't discuss it. You're only going to spoil your relationship. But if you feel they can take it, then discuss it.
Great. Thanks, Chetan. There are a bunch of other questions, but in the interest of time, Shravanti, would you like to wrap it up?
Thanks so much for joining us today, Chetan. As always, a very interesting conversation. And I hope our audience enjoyed it as well. And Chetan's books are all available at the bookshop over here. So do pick up the book. Sorry, we can't offer an author signing, but maybe some other day, next year.
Yes. And thank you guys who physically made it. It means a lot that you, not just for me, but the fact that you came for a Lit Fest and you supported literature. And congrats, Bangalore Literature Festival. Honestly, I thought this is crazy, but you guys pulled it off. Hats off, man. That's why it's one of the leading Lit Fests in the country. Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chetan.